I am June Ellis, 27. And last Tuesday I sat in a private room at the Meridian Hotel, trying to be the kind of daughter who keeps her shoulders back while my brother's promotion dinner swelled with easy laughter. Then his toast landed with a line about family success without the loser, and I swallowed the sting and said, "Proud of you anyway," because I had learned that some nights are better served with grace. But at 9:47, a blue banner lit the linen from our family thread with a Forbes link and 5 words that changed the air. Your sister made the under 30 list. Forks, stilled smiles thinned, and in that hush, I chose 3 rules for myself: privacy, dignity, breath. I would not make a scene, and I would not be small, because what happened next was never just about a list. It was about the rooms we keep and the lines we draw when the people we love mistake our silence for defeat. In the 48 hours that followed, there would be headlines that wink a watermark trail, questions at his office, and a choice. No family handbook covers, so if someone at your own table ever decided you were the loser, what boundary would you set when the truth finally sits down beside you? Stay with me, and I will show you how one alert can redraw a family without a single raised voice. The private dining room at the Meridian Hotel had that warm hotel glow that makes everyone look a little richer and a little kinder. Our table was a long oval dressed in white linen and glassware that chimed every time someone reached for water. I sat between my mother Patricia and Maddie, my brother's fiancée, and tried to keep my back straight the way she always told me to do at family dinners. Connor had invited a few colleagues from Harrington and Rowe, and they arrived with the easy laughter of people who had been drinking champagne since happy hour. He looked sharp in a navy suit with a burgundy tie, the kind of tie he buys when he needs to feel like the room belongs to him. He lifted his glass and told the table that our family was finally enjoying success without the loser. Laughter rolled around the room like a tossed coin. Someone slapped his shoulder the way men do when they want to cheer aggression without naming it. Maddie's fingers tightened around her napkin, and then she reached for my hand under the table and gave it a quick squeeze. I kept my face soft and told him I was proud of him. I meant it. I had rehearsed those words in the cab so they would sound smooth and not catch on the old splinters lodged inside our family. Carla, the dining room manager, drifted close with the skill of someone who has refereed 1,000 private celebrations. She asked if we wanted the drapes drawn for more privacy, and my mother nodded yes. Carla pulled the cords, and the city dulled to a softer set of diamonds. The room settled. A server poured more wine, and my father said something about promotions and momentum, and how Connor always had drive even as a kid. I let the words pass over me like warm water. I had promised myself I would not argue at my brother's party. Tonight belonged to him. It was 9:47 p.m. on November 11th of 2024 when Connor's phone lit up on the table. A banner bloomed across his screen from our family group thread. Your sister made the under 30 list, followed by a blue link to Forbes. The table noise thinned into a confusing hush. Connor blinked as if a light had flashed in his eyes. He tapped the banner, and I watched the posture of the men beside him change by inches, the respectful tilt that appears when people sense a shift they cannot yet explain. I felt my own phone buzz in my clutch. When I slid it out, the Forbes app had the standard alert, a clean headline about the new class of Forbes 30 under 30 for 2025. I opened it, and there was my headshot, the one I almost did not pay for, because I was still splitting rent with my server costs. Underneath it was the name of my company, Aurora Metrics, and a short line about what our platform does. The paragraph was small and neat, and oddly gentle. For a second, I saw my life pressed flat into that text, years of building and doubt and ramen and server outages reduced to 3 sentences, an evaluation number that belonged to many hands, not just mine. My father stopped mid-sentence. My mother's hand was on my arm without me realizing it had moved there. The colleagues sat back. Connor's smile drained away so slowly it felt like a trick of the light. He said there must be some kind of mistake, and then he stopped because even he could hear the way that sounded. Maddie looked at me with a watery half-smile and whispered that she was sorry she laughed earlier. I shook my head once. I was not going to turn this into a courtroom inside a restaurant. I was not going to win anything tonight except my own quiet. Carla appeared again with practiced calm, and asked if everything was all right or if anyone needed a moment in the lounge. I thanked her and said we were fine. I could hear the city through the drapes in the way you can hear a seashell and know the ocean is out there even if you cannot see it. The server set down a plate of steak for my brother and a piece of salmon for me. Forks found their marks. Someone asked about the dessert options. A colleague began a story about a difficult client. The room tried to heal itself with chatter. Connor leaned in my direction without looking at me and said that I had kept this from the family. I told him I did not pick the timing and that tonight was his. I told him I did not plan to explain anything here. The words were simple, and they did not tremble. He gave a small nod, and I saw in that nod the boy who used to let me sit in the dugout when his Little League team played at the park, the boy who once gave me his jacket when I shivered in the bleachers. Then the nod was gone, tucked under the man who needs every room to be his room. I lifted my water glass and took a slow sip. I could feel my heartbeat, but it was no longer racing. I read the headline again on my screen like it belonged to a stranger. The text from the group thread sat above it. My mother's foreword and a string of celebratory emojis from my aunt that somehow made my eyes sting. I set the phone face down and smoothed the napkin over my knees. Privacy, dignity, breath. The three things I promised myself on the elevator ride up. The server returned to ask if we wanted coffee with dessert. Carla adjusted a candle that had gone crooked, and the small flame corrected itself. The rest of the room hummed with ordinary dinner sounds. Somewhere in the hotel, a piano was playing a standard that made me think of high school dances and borrowed dresses. I looked around the table and told myself that there would be time later for statements and explanations and strategy. There would be time for whatever this meant for my work and for our family. Right now, there was a plate in front of me and a brother who had asked the universe to cheer for him. I could let the universe do the talking for a few minutes more. The coffee question drifted away, and the music from somewhere down the hall kept playing the same soft pattern as if the piano knew people were trying to save face. My father set his wine down, and the stem clicked against the plate in a way that made everyone look up. His hand had a tremor he usually hides. My mother stared at the candles like they could coach her on what to say next. Maddie sat very still. Then she slid her hand over mine under the table and squeezed. I felt her thumb make a small circle against my skin. She whispered an apology that sounded like a thread pulled through cloth, and I nodded once to say I heard her, and that it was enough for now. My phone buzzed in my clutch again. A text from my cousin Tara had 3 short lines that felt like an anchor. Stay calm. Do not engage. Breathe. I let my lungs do the work they had practiced in quieter rooms. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. I looked at the length of the table and saw how the laughter had washed out of the faces of my brother's colleagues, leaving behind a gentler curiosity that tried to hide itself. I could almost hear them recalibrating. Promotions and momentum, yes, and something else they had not planned to witness at a celebration dinner. I caught Carla's eye at the door and lifted a finger, a small request. She read the room like a map and stepped over. Would you like a moment in the hall? She asked in that careful hotel voice that treats everyone with equal dignity. I thanked her and told my parents I needed a breath of air. My mother gave a quick nod that said, "Oh," and my father adjusted his napkin with unnecessary precision. Maddie shifted in her chair, as if she might stand, then stayed seated when I touched her wrist to say she should not follow. Carla guided me to the side entrance she had used earlier to lower the drapes. The corridor beyond was quiet and cool. A framed photograph of the Chicago skyline hung at the turn, all silver, water, and steel. I leaned against the wall and let the quiet settle on my shoulders. My phone showed me the glow of the group thread, and then the clean lines of the Forbes headline again. It felt like a bell tolling in a different room. In that small neutral hallway, I made 3 decisions. I would not argue at the table. I would honor that the party belonged to Connor. I would verify facts and prepare a simple message that protected my team and our clients. They were not heroic decisions. They were the kind of decisions you make when you know that posture can be louder than any statement. I typed a note to myself so I would not forget the exact order. No debate at dinner. Respect the event. Verify and prepare. I added a line about Aurora Metrics and our clients and the care we owe them. I added a line that reminded me to thank the people who carried the work through the nights when I did not have capacity to carry it alone. Then I slid the Notes app away and stood up straight. From inside the room, I could hear cutlery and the kind murmur that fills gaps in conversations after an unexpected truth enters a family. Someone laughed lightly at something ordinary. I felt my spine relax. I checked my reflection in the glass of the framed photograph and pushed a stray hair behind my ear. The dress had seemed too simple when I left my apartment, but right then I was grateful for black fabric that did not ask for attention. Tara texted again. I am here if you need me. That steadied me more than I expected. I told her I was okay and that I was stepping out to make a call. She sent a heart that felt less like decoration and more like a hand on my shoulder. I pulled up Daniel Restrepo in my favorites. Before I hit the call, I stood and listened to the hotel air for a few seconds. It smelled faintly of citrus and polished wood. I could hear the piano turn a corner into something brighter. Through the drapes, I imagined Connor at the head of the table working to stitch his grin back into place, trying to find the rhythm of small talk again. I wanted more than anything to have his celebration back for him, even if it had never really been mine to offer. My mother stepped to the doorway and peered around the corner. Her eyes looked like they did when I was 12 and had forgotten my lines in the school play. She did not speak. She just pressed her palm to the air in a little gesture that meant, "Go on, I am fine." I gave her the same nod I always gave her before stepping on stage. Then she retreated into the warm light, and the panel of the door settled back into place. I pressed the green button and lifted the phone to my ear. The line clicked and began to ring, and I walked toward the quieter bend of the corridor where the carpet changed from one pattern to another, and the city outside the wall kept shining without knowing anything about us. I stepped into the quieter bend of the corridor and lifted the phone to my ear. The ringtone felt steady like a metronome for my breath. Daniel picked up on the second ring. His voice had that courtroom calm that wastes no one's time. I told him where I was and what had just landed in the middle of dinner. He said he had been expecting the list to publish this week and that he had already skimmed the profile. He went straight to the numbers. Series C closed on October 28th of 2024. The round size was 120 million post money, roughly 900 million on paper. His phrasing had the soft edges that protect a client. He reminded me that my current ownership sits at about 55% on paper, and that on paper is a phrase worth repeating until the day a wire hits a bank account. A hush from the dining room drifted down the hall and broke apart around my shoes. Daniel asked if anyone outside the approved circle could have forwarded materials. He said there is a non-zero chance the details came from someone on the investor side, and that we should audit access immediately. He laid out steps I know he teaches junior associates. Pull the last diligence deck. Confirm watermark versions. Match timestamps to recipient lists. In parallel, he would alert our outside counsel at the fund that likely provided the leak and ask for an internal check without throwing gasoline on the fire. We would use cautious language. We would not accuse. We would request confirmation of controls and a commitment to correct any inaccuracies in the press. He shifted to communications. He said the message tonight should be short and kind and extremely boring. Congratulations to your brother. Thank Forbes for the recognition. Reaffirm our commitment to client privacy and outcomes. Do not engage in a victory lap. Do not litigate in public. Let other people use adjectives. You stick to nouns and verbs. He asked if I had a PR partner on speed dial. I said yes, and that I would loop her in now. He told me to send him anything I planned to post, and he would scan it for legal pitfalls. He said he would have a paralegal start the watermark audit before midnight. I thanked him and ended the call feeling as if the hallway had widened by an inch. The piano from the lounge was playing something brighter now. I scrolled to Sophie Alvarez in my contacts and hit the call. She answered with the clipped rhythm of a woman who has put out more fires than she can count. I summarized the dinner, the banner from the family, thread the profile the way the room had gone still. She said we would keep the tone gracious and grown up. She offered 3 pillars that matched what Daniel had said: gratitude, family, responsibility. She suggested a 2-sentence post within the hour. She also suggested a photo that did not turn the moment into a stage. No podium shots, no raised glasses, something neutral. She would draft a copy and text it to me within 5 minutes. She would also watch for tabloid framing and send a request for correction if anyone published a headline that turned my brother into a villain or me into a prop. I told her I agreed and added one line I wanted in there: success is not a competition inside a family. She said it was simple and human and would land well with people who have lived long enough to know better. She asked if I wanted to hold comments or let them run. I told her to let them run and to mute anything that targeted my mother or Maddie. She said she would monitor from her laptop until I told her to stand down. When we hung up, I opened a new message to Priya. I told her that the press might call and that we should be ready with 2 kinds of answers: one that explained our technology in plain English, and one that met the technical bar for enterprise buyers who would read between the lines. I asked her to gather the 3 clearest proof points we had from the past quarter. Time to value pilots. A measurable lift in forecast accuracy. The data governance protocol we built to keep customers safe. I told her I wanted all answers to root through the same promise: we protect privacy. We drive measurable outcomes. We do not sell hype. My phone buzzed with Sophie's draft. I read it twice. It thanked Forbes without gushing. It congratulated Connor with empathy instead of irony. It reminded the world that families are not leaderboards, and that I was grateful to build with a team that cared more about client outcomes than about headlines. Daniel's email arrived a minute later with a green light and a small edit that swapped one adjective for a noun. I saved the post to my notes and put the phone back in my clutch without hitting publish. Not yet. Not in the hallway. Not until I walked back in and remembered that there was still a dinner to finish and people who needed gentle exits. I stood there for another breath and felt the tightness in my shoulders ease. Privacy, dignity, breath. I let those words settle again and started back toward the private dining room. As I reached the door, I saw Connor waiting just inside the threshold. He had moved away from his seat and was staring at the grain of the wood as if it could tell him what comes next. For a heartbeat, we were 10 and 16 again, sharing a hallway in our old house, both of us listening for what the adults would decide. I put my hand on the cool brass of the handle and kept my face calm, ready to step back into a celebration with the smallest version of myself that the night required. Connor did not look up when I stepped back inside. He spoke in a voice meant only for me and asked if I had kept this from the family. I felt the old heat reach for my face and then pass right by. I told him I did not choose the timing, that tonight was his, that I would not explain here. The words landed between us like 3 smooth stones. He blinked and his jaw moved as if he might argue. Then he let the air out of his chest and nodded once. Maddie rose partway from her chair and then sat again. She reached for my hand and her apology came out steady. She said she was sorry for laughing earlier and that she should have read the room better. I squeezed her fingers to say we were all right. She was wearing that soft green silk that made her look like a quiet light in a crowded place. For a second, I felt grateful she belonged to my brother, because kindness is a trait a man can borrow from the person he loves. I asked if we could finish the dinner with respect and ease and no more surprises. Connor said yes without meeting my eyes. The table had held its breath for long enough and now wanted instruction. I gave it with action instead of speech. I slipped back into my chair, set my phone on silent, and poured water for my mother. She thanked me in that small voice she uses when she is trying not to cry. My father wiped the rim of his glass with his thumb and asked the server about dessert, as if dessert had become a life raft. Carla approached with that smooth hotel calm and offered a short list. Chocolate torte, lemon tart, coffee service, tea if anyone preferred. I asked for coffee and whatever chef recommended that paired well with it. She gave a professional smile that somehow felt personal and told me she would bring a sampler so no one would have to decide. The colleagues brightened at the prospect of choices that did not require choosing. I folded my napkin and listened as the conversation stitched itself back together. A colleague told a story about a campaign launch in Detroit where the lights went out and the team pitched in the hallway by phone flashlights. Another chimed in with a memory about a pitch in an office with a broken thermostat and how Connor had kept his tie on even when everyone else surrendered. There was a gentle attempt to remind the room of his drive and his steadiness. I let the stories do their work. Maddie leaned toward me and asked if I needed anything. I told her I was fine and that we could talk later in private if she wanted. Her shoulders loosened. My mother dabbed at her nose and asked if I had eaten enough. I told her the salmon was perfect. She nodded and stared at the candle as if it might reward her for good manners. The coffee arrived on a silver tray, milk in a tiny pitcher, sugar in a neat bowl with a small spoon that clinked like a bell. Carla set down plates of glossy chocolate, a pale wedge of lemon tart, and something with berries that looked like a small celebration all by itself. The room leaned toward pleasure again. Someone laughed at nothing more than the relief of having something sweet to put in a mouth that had been holding back words. Connor cleared his throat and thanked everyone for coming. He mentioned the team at Harrington and Rowe and the long nights that never make it into a promotion announcement. He said the word family in a way that did not sting. When he finished, he lifted his coffee instead of his wine. We all lifted something in return. The toast was short and quiet and good. Plates moved. Forks found their marks. I asked Carla about the coffee roast and she told me it was a blend from a local roaster on the north side. I said it was lovely and thanked her for watching over us. It was a small conversation and it did the small job it needed to do. No one asked me about Forbes. No one said the words under 30. The room accepted the boundary I had drawn and settled inside it like a guest who knows where not to sit. When the check came, my father reached for it on reflex. Connor put his hand on top of my father's hand and said he had it covered. The moment between them looked like a bridge being repaired. My father let go. My mother started telling Maddie about a holiday recipe she wanted to try. The colleagues began the ritual of polite goodnights coats and quick handshakes that promise future lunches. Chairs scraped softly against the carpet and then settled back into place. I stood and helped my mother into her coat. She whispered that she was proud of both her children and that sometimes life delivers lessons on a schedule no one selects. I told her we were all right. Connor came around this table and hugged her. He hugged me as well, a careful short hug that felt like an apology not yet translated into words. I accepted it as the only language he had at the moment. Carla held the door and wished us a good evening. The hallway beyond was quiet and cool. The piano had moved on to something cheerful that made me think of Saturday mornings and open windows. I walked beside my mother toward the elevator and kept my steps even. Behind us, the private dining room softened back into anonymity. Another event finished another story folded into linen and glass. We waited for the elevator in a small circle, and I let the silence be gentle instead of tense. When the doors opened, we stepped in together, and for the brief ride down, no one said anything at all. Morning brought the kind of gray light that makes the city look honest. I woke before my alarm and lay still long enough to hear a bus hiss at the corner. My phone was face down on the nightstand. I did not want it, and I wanted it. I turned it over and the screen filled with badges that stacked like a deck of cards. Mentions, messages, a flood. Tara had been awake before me. She sent a list of links with a short note that said she was watching the conversation. The first link opened to Connor's LinkedIn post from the night before. A colleague had snapped a clean photo in the private dining room. He was in the navy suit and burgundy tie. I was behind him in a simple black dress. Maddie was to his left in green silk. The caption was a standard thank you to his team and a line about momentum. Underneath it, the numbers climbed. By noon, the counter ticked to 2,400 reactions, and the comments turned into a hallway where people spoke too loudly. Some of the notes were kind in the way professionals learn to be kind in public spaces. Others compared. One called me the real winner. One asked if Connor knew now how that loser line had aged in a single night. I read until my chest felt tight, and then I stopped. I did not need a chorus to conduct my morning. Sophie texted that she was at her laptop. She had already seen a tabloid piece by a writer named Chad Morton. He had used the phrase "loser no more" and garnished it with a winking tone that made our dinner sound like a sitcom episode. She said she would draft a correction request and send it to his editor with language that pressed facts without punching faces. I told her yes, and that I would post something simple on my own channels once I had coffee and the words to match the plan we made. I put water on the stove and watched the kettle until it sang. The apartment had the quiet I liked before a workday. I poured coffee into a mug I had bought at a street fair and sat at the small table by the window. I opened a blank note and tried 2 versions of a message. Both sounded too much like a performance. I deleted and waited, the way you wait for a stubborn jar lid to give. When the tone landed, it was the same tone I had chosen all night. Plain. Warm. No fireworks. I thanked Forbes for including me. I congratulated Connor and said I was proud of him. I wrote that success inside a family is not a contest. I added 1 sentence that pointed outward to my team and to the companies we serve. I kept adjectives on a short leash. Sophie sent a tiny thumbs up and a reminder to attach an image that would not turn the post into an ad. We agreed on a single photo from dinner taken by one of Connor's colleagues. It showed the table at an angle. The outfits were clear enough for anyone keeping score on continuity, but no one was posing. It looked like what it was. A family at dinner under a soft hotel light. I checked the crop and made sure no one at the table looked caught mid-blink. I set comments to open and asked Sophie to monitor for anything that targeted my mother or Maddie. She said she would mute cruel posts and leave room for grown-ups to be grown-ups. Daniel emailed a short note that said the wording was safe and that he had sent the first watermark audit request to the investor contacts. He would loop me in when someone responded. I posted and set the phone down. I let my eyes rest on the steam rising from the mug and felt my shoulders lower. The message did not need me to stand guard. It could do its job while I made oatmeal and answered 2 emails from Priya about a data pipeline fix. We went back and forth on the phrasing for a technical answer that would satisfy an engineer at an enterprise account without giving away any competitive edge. I wrote that we protect privacy and deliver measurable outcomes. She wrote back that she would prepare a short brief for anyone who asked, and that she was proud of me. I smiled into my coffee and felt the small relief of being seen by someone who shares the work. My screen lit again. It was a text from Connor. He wrote 2 words. Thank you. There were no exclamation marks. I stared at the words for a moment and let them be what they were. Not an apology. Not a change of heart. A step. I typed a simple, "You are welcome," and put the phone face down again. By midday, Tara reported that the post had been shared by a couple of local business writers with gentle comments about siblings and timing and how the internet loves to reframe a family in a single night. Sophie pinged that she had sent the correction request to the tabloid and that the editor had replied with a generic note about reviewing language. She would follow up after lunch if nothing changed. I washed the coffee mug and left it to dry on the rack. Outside, a siren moved through the neighborhood and disappeared. I checked my watch and remembered I had code I actually enjoyed waiting in a window on my laptop. The work had not changed just because a list had caught up to it. I closed the blinds halfway to soften the light and sat down at my desk. The post would find its own level. The numbers on Connor's page would do whatever numbers do. My job was to keep building the thing that got us here. By mid-afternoon, the November light turned a clearer kind of white across my desk. I walked to the sink, rinsed my bowl, and felt the quiet of the apartment settle around me like a heavy sweater. The phone lit again and again until it skittered an inch across the table. A preview showed Maddie's name and the kind of short sentences people send when they do not want to cry at work. She wrote that an email had arrived from HR at Harrington and Rowe with Connor's name in the subject line and language that sounded like procedure instead of comfort. I called her. Office noise floated through the dry whisper of vents and a printer somewhere down the hall. She said the message came from a woman named Linda Park with the title HR Business Partner, and that it opened a fact-finding review, 10 business days, interviews with his team, and with cross-functional partners. A request for documents and correspondence tied to the campaign he had presented during promotion week. The email also listed possible outcomes that made Maddie's voice go thin. A written warning. Probation. A clawback of a portion of his Q4 bonus if the review found misrepresentation of credit. I listened while she exhaled in a slow count. She asked what she should tell him. I said I was not going to coach him through HR from my kitchen table. He knows how to cooperate. He knows how defensiveness reads across a conference room. She said she would remind him to show his work and his respect, and then she thanked me, which I did not expect. A few minutes later, a text from Connor came through. It was clipped the way he writes when he's holding a heavy thought in his mouth. He had a kickoff meeting on the calendar with Linda at 2:30. I typed a reply that had been forming since the elevator ride at the hotel. If you need me to support you, say it directly. I will not insert myself into your company. Boundaries help us both. The message felt like standing on both feet. He responded that he understood. The apartment was warm. The radiator hummed. I sat at my desk and opened the work window that always waits for me. Lines of code do not care about dinner parties or headlines. They ask for clarity. Priya sent a quick note about a test run, and I sent a quick answer. A small calm returned to my shoulders. At 3:20, a new message from Connor appeared. The meeting had ended. Linda had laid out the steps like a map. Over the next 10 business days, she would schedule and conduct interviews with his direct reports with a partner team from analytics and with a senior account lead who had attended the client briefing described in the promotion memo. She requested a tidy packet showing version history deliverables and email threads that could establish who contributed what and when. She spoke in that careful HR cadence that is neither harsh nor soft, and then she explained potential consequences again. A written warning. Probation. A clawback of part of the Q4 bonus. He wrote that the word clawback sat in the room like a brick. I wrote back that cooperation is not a performance, it is a practice. Provide facts. Answer what is asked. Stop at the period. He sent a single word that said he would. Maddie texted a photo of a legal pad on Connor's desk with a cup of coffee beside it. 4 bullet points in his tight handwriting. Collect deliverables. Map credits. Confirm dates. Prepare to walk through in order. I felt something shift, a small pivot away from the swagger that had filled a private dining room and toward a steadier, quieter kind of work. Sophie's name popped up with a screenshot of the tabloid headline updated after her email. The winking tone had been shaved down to something closer to a recap than a jab. Daniel forwarded a reply from an investor contact that acknowledged our watermark audit request and said an internal check had begun on their end. None of it solved everything. All of it prevented escalation. Near 4:30, I stepped to the window and watched the light leave the street. Delivery trucks puffed little clouds. A dog pulled its person past the building with the certainty only dogs have. My phone buzzed again. Connor asked if I could read a draft of an email to his team that explained the process and set an expectation for cooperation. I told him to send it. He used clear language that avoided panic. He said he welcomed the review and that he would share his materials by morning. He asked his team to share theirs promptly and to treat the interviews as a chance to show the work rather than to rehearse loyalty. I suggested one change that removed a defensive phrase and he accepted it. The day thinned out in the way late afternoons do. I set a timer for tea and moved a stack of papers from one side of the desk to the other. The apartment had that clean end-of-day quiet. I thought about balance. The night before, a spotlight had swung toward me because a list had printed its names. Today a lamp turned on over my brother at work, the kind of lamp that reveals seams and stitching. I did not feel vindicated. I felt something like gravity adjusting until it felt truer. I sent a last message with the boundary I meant to keep. If you need me to support you, say it plainly. I will not interfere. I trust you to do the right thing." Then I set the phone down and listened to the water on the stove begin to whisper. The room held its breath and then let it go. Outside, the city kept moving without us. By mid-morning the next day, the loop felt like a river of coats and briefcases. I rode the elevator to the 19th floor and stepped into Ethan Caldwell's office, where the carpet swallowed footsteps and the walls wore framed prints of prairie landscapes. My parents were already seated on a soft gray couch. My father held a leather folder like a shield. My mother kept smoothing the crease in her skirt, as if good manners could iron a weak flat. It was a thought. Connor arrived a minute later with Maddie, a careful nod, no swagger. Ethan greeted us with a measured calm that could steady a ship. He began with coffee and water and a short overview of what an estate plan is supposed to do. He said a good plan respects reality instead of nostalgia. He described wills and beneficiary designations and powers of attorney in a way that even tired people could follow. I watched my parents lean toward him as if hearing an old story told properly for the first time. He did not speak like a salesman. He spoke like someone who has sat with families after funerals and seen the cost of pretending. Ethan opened a folder and reviewed the plan my parents had signed years ago. The handwriting on the sticky notes was my father's neat print. There were assumptions baked into those pages that felt like a map drawn before anyone had walked the trail. Ethan pointed out where the plan might create friction. He asked about current assets and future needs. He asked who actually handled what in our family and who would be willing to handle more. My father looked out the window. He said that when he was young, a man's job was to make sure his son stood on his shoulders. He said he had not noticed that his daughter had built her own ladder. My mother's eyes went bright and she pressed a tissue to the corner without smudging her makeup. She said she did not want her children to end up enemies because of paperwork written in another season. Ethan suggested a principle we could remember when the room was empty: transparency and fairness over tradition and guesswork. He recommended updating the will to remove automatic preferences that favored one child over another. He advised splitting certain assets by percentage rather than by category, and naming each of us to roles that match skill, not birth order. For powers of attorney, he asked about health decisions and financial decisions, and whether one person should hold both, or if we preferred a check and balance. The air changed. It felt like a window had opened. I heard myself speak and kept my tone even. I said I would support our family when there was a clear financial plan and a timeline with tasks and signatures. I said I would not be the person who puts out fires of panic at midnight because someone forgot to plan at noon. I said I loved my parents and I wanted long-term clarity more than short-term comfort. The words surprised me with how calmly they landed. My mother nodded into her tissue. My father's mouth moved into a line that was not angry. It was a thought. Connor cleared his throat and said he understood why the plan needed an update. He did not make a speech. He did not make a joke. Maddie placed her hand on his knee and left it there like a small anchor. In that quiet, I could feel the restaurant from 2 nights ago losing its hold over this room. The loser line that had bounced around a table of colleagues did not fit here where signatures could change the future. My brother looked smaller and larger at the same time. Smaller because performance had drained away. Larger because he was finally visible without it. Ethan summarized our options. He could draft a revised will with clear percentages and contingent instructions. He could prepare separate powers of attorney so that decisions would not bottleneck. He could create a letter of intent that outlined values for charitable gifts and care for extended family members. He recommended a family meeting every 2 years to check assumptions against reality. He asked each of us if this sounded workable. My father said yes. My mother said yes. Connor said yes. I said yes. The mini-climax happened without a drumbeat. Ethan lifted a pen and circled today's date on a scheduling sheet. He offered a signing appointment for the following week to review drafts and sign in person. My parents agreed. He asked for a list of current accounts and beneficiaries by Friday, so the paperwork would not lag. My father handed over the leather folder as if he had been waiting to put it down. My mother thanked Ethan for speaking plainly because plain words made her feel safe. We stood. Chairs murmured against the carpet. Connor kept his eyes on the edge of the conference table. He had not argued. He had not tried to steer. I understood that the joke at the hotel had sent a bill, and today he was seeing the line items. Maddie squeezed my hand when our parents were not looking. Her eyes were warm and steady. I squeezed back and let that be our agreement. Ethan walked us to the door and said his assistant would send a checklist before lunch. The hallway smelled faintly like clean paper. The elevator arrived with a small gust of air. Inside the car, my mother reached for my father's arm and he let her keep it. Connor stared at the floor numbers light up in order. When the doors opened to the lobby, the city met us with its bright midweek noise. We stepped out as a group and paused by the revolving doors. For a moment, no one filled the silence. It did not feel like waiting. It felt like the room of our family had been measured and a new frame was on its way. By early afternoon, the air over the river had that pewter shine Chicago gets before the first real cold. I closed my laptop long enough to change into a navy blazer and flats I could stand in for hours. Priya met me in the lobby with her backpack and a calm that steadied every room she entered. We walked to Silverline's office through the midday crowd, two women carrying a decade of late nights in a single laptop bag. Security printed badges, and an assistant led us to a glass conference room with a view that made the city look arranged. Marcus Reed was already there, sleeves rolled. The posture of a man who thinks in grids. Two directors from merchandising joined, then a lawyer from legal with a neat binder and a way of looking that measured both words and intent. Marcus nodded once and asked if we were ready to show him how Aurora would actually move needles for a retailer that lives and dies by seasons. We began with the simplest thing, a clear table of inputs and outputs. I set the frame on why forecast accuracy matters when a winter coat arrives 3 weeks late, or a floral dress shows up after school has already started. Priya took the clicker and walked the room through the model stack in plain English. She explained how we handle sparse data and new product introductions without hallucinating demand, how we fuse store-level signals with regional weather anomalies so that a cold snap in Milwaukee does not get averaged into a national shrug. Legal asked about privacy. Priya and I answered together like a practiced chord. We showed the anonymization pipeline and the separation between identifiers and behavior. We explained our policy that we never move raw customer names into our environment, that we hash what needs hashing and salt what needs salting, that a vendor should never be a liability on the front page. Marcus glanced at legal, and I watched the lawyer make a small check mark in the margin of her binder. We moved to service levels. I outlined what we commit to in writing. Uptime measured in nines that mean something. Response windows that honor a buyer who lives on deadlines. Incident reporting that does not force a client to chase us. Then I put up a single slide that held numbers my team loves to protect. Pilot results from the last quarter. A lift in forecast accuracy into the low teens for several seasonal categories. A measurable reduction in stockouts on key items. A margin improvement that did not look like a miracle, but did look like work done well. Questions came clean and fast. A director asked what happens when vendor lead times jump without warning. Priya showed how the model absorbs shocks and throws flags instead of smoothing them away. Legal asked about data residency and audit logs. I described our controls and our willingness to submit to third-party audits. Marcus asked about time to value. I laid out a plan that did not overpromise. A week to align data feeds. 2 weeks to run and calibrate. A first useful signal by the end of the month if we both do our part. No glitter, no magic. We switched to the demo. Priya drove while I narrated the business impact. On the screen, a dashboard moved from raw feeds to a shelf-level view of sweaters and boots and party dresses, 3 cities, 4 weeks a set of levers a buyer could understand before a second cup of coffee. We showed a January cold front and how the curve adjusted for upper Midwest stores without starving the South. We showed a back-to-school weekend and how backpacks and lunchboxes rise together even when promotions pull at different times. Someone in merchandising leaned forward with that slight tilt that says, "A tool has finally started speaking your language." The room settled into the kind of silence that follows a clean run. Marcus thanked us and stayed standing. He said he wanted to anchor expectations with a clock he could defend. Internal conversations would happen for the next 48 hours. The go or no-go decision would land by noon on Friday the 15th of November, 2024. If the answer was no-go, the pilot would push the first quarter pipeline for Aurora out of place, and we would all have to carry that weight into January. If the answer was go, we would start immediately and someone on his side would be in my office before the week ended. I felt the words fall into me like stones that mark a path instead of block it. Deadlines are not enemies when they are clear. I asked if there were any more questions we could answer in the room. Legal requested a copy of our draft service terms and a sample of an incident response notice. Priya promised to send both before close of business with the changelog highlighted. Marcus asked for a one-page summary he could carry into a meeting with a chief merchant who hated jargon. I told him he would have it in his inbox within the hour. We powered down and packed up to the small sound of cables coiling. In the elevator, Priya leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes for one breath. She said the charts behaved, and I said the story did too. At street level, the wind met us like a test we had not dressed for. We walked fast until our shoulders warmed. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie asking how it went. I typed that we had done our part and that the clock was now running where it should run. Back at the office, we sent the follow-ups before our coats even loosened. Priya dropped the service terms into a clean email with the attachments labeled the way a lawyer likes to see them. I wrote the one-pager with a pen and then typed it word for word so it would read like a person talking to another person. Marcus replied within minutes, and I let the words sit on the screen like a small light. When the building emptied in the evening, we stayed a few minutes longer. Priya checked the build for the morning run. I cleaned the whiteboard and left one line at the top so my team would see it first. Protect privacy. Deliver outcomes. No hype. Then I shut off the lights, and the monitors went to sleep all at once. Outside, the sky had turned the soft color of a lake just before night. We stepped into it tired and steady, and ready to let the next 48 hours do their work. Morning settled over the river in a clean gray, and my inbox had already stacked itself into a staircase. Daniel's subject line carried the calm weight I had come to trust. Overnight, he and a paralegal had pulled every version of our diligence deck and mapped the trail like cartographers. The watermark on the deck that contained the Series C summary showed a unique code assigned to a packet sent to Armitage Ventures the week before the round closed. Timestamps matched. Access logs showed 3 openings within their network, one of them tied to an associate named Owen Blake. Daniel had already reached out to the fund's legal team with careful language. He asked for an internal verification of controls and for a commitment to correct any inaccurate press. By 9:30, he called and walked me through the response that had just landed. Armitage confirmed after an internal check that an associate had violated their communications policy at an off-the-record press meetup. They did not use adjectives. They did not name intent. They acknowledged a breach. They would issue a staff reminder, and they were prepared to support corrections in any outlet that had printed numbers without context. Daniel said he would send a letter that combined a request for correction with a cease and desist on further speculation, and that he would copy me for the archive. I listened and felt the small click that happens when facts line up. It was not a triumph. It was a relief that the ground was in one piece under my feet. My phone buzzed with Sophie's name. She had already drafted the correction request to the tabloid and to the editor who had greenlit the Loser No More headline. Her note pressed facts without flexing muscle. She asked for removal of the winking line that framed our dinner as a punchline, and for an editor's note clarifying that financial details were presented without full context and had been reworded. At 10:15, my screen flashed with a new message from a name I did not expect to see. It was Owen. The first line said he was writing to apologize. He acknowledged that he had spoken too freely at a networking event and that in trying to sound informed, he had repeated numbers from a deck he had no business summarizing to a reporter. He said there was no malice, only poor judgment. He said he accepted whatever internal consequence his firm deemed appropriate. I read it twice and let the apology sit like a stone in water. I forwarded it to Daniel and to Sophie without comment. By late morning, Chad Morton had updated his story. The headline softened into something that read like a recap rather than a smirk. An editor's note appeared at the top stating that certain details had been clarified after additional information from sources and from the company. The body copy lost the sitcom tone. It still told a story about a family dinner and an inconvenient alert, but it stopped treating us as cartoon characters. Sophie sent me a screenshot with a short line that said, "This was the shape of a win on a weekday." My phone rang again. A producer from a talk show wanted a segment and phrased it as a celebration of women in tech and of siblings who surprise each other. I could hear the move under the sugar. Sophie was already on another line telling me not to touch it. I thanked the producer and said I would not appear and that my work did not belong in a studio right now. I sent a short statement through Sophie that reiterated our focus. We were grateful for recognition. We were committed to client outcomes and privacy. We would not be commenting on family dynamics or investor materials. Priya slid into my office with a printed copy of the latest build notes, because she knows I read better on paper when the day turns loud. She asked how the morning had gone, and I told her the word confirmed had done most of the work. She nodded and said the demo environment was still behaving, and that she had prepared a short technical brief in case Silverline's engineers wanted details before Friday. She left it on my desk and it looked like a small island of order in a busy sea. Daniel sent me a copy of the legal letter he had delivered to Armitage and to the tabloid. The phrases were careful and firm. He referenced the internal acknowledgement from the fund and the paper trail of the watermark. He requested prompt correction and a commitment to avoid further speculative reporting on confidential material. He noted that we reserved all rights and that our preference was to resolve the matter without further escalation. I saved the letter into a folder where I keep the documents that hold pressure so I do not have to. After lunch, Tara texted a link. The updated tabloid story had begun to pick up comments telling the writer to leave families alone and to stop pretending real work is just fodder for a wink. I did not read more than a few. I did not need a chorus today. Connor sent a brief message that he had seen the correction and that he was focusing on his HR packet. Maddie sent a photo of the legal pad again with more lines filled in. The handwriting looked steadier. The clock moved toward afternoon. I took a short walk around the block and let the cold clean out the edges of my thoughts. The street smelled like roasted nuts from a cart in somebody's laundry vent. When I came back, the office felt warmer. I wrote 2 emails, one to Marcus Short, and to the point confirming that we were available for any follow-up questions while his team deliberated and that our privacy posture remained unchanged. One to my own team, thanking them for the silence they had kept all week while our names bounced around town, reminding them that restraint is not weakness when the work can speak. In the late day, Daniel called once more to say the investor legal team had sent over a formal internal note of policy reminder and that they would log the incident for their own compliance records. He said he was closing the loop on our side unless something new appeared. I told him thank you and stared for a moment at the white corner of the legal letter on my screen. It is a strange comfort when the paper shields you build actually hold. Outside, the light slipped toward evening and the city turned on its lamps one by one. The waiting room smelled faintly of eucalyptus and new carpet. Dr. Elaine Porter kept a small lamp in the corner and a glass bowl of smooth stones on the table between 2 chairs. Connor arrived a few minutes early and sat with his hands together like a person who had been told to hold still. I could see the workday on his face, the kind of tiredness that does not ask for permission. Dr. Porter opened the door and invited us in with a nod that felt like a handrail on a stair. Her office was warm and orderly. She asked what brought us, and then waited for silence to clear a space. I said that our family had been speaking in performance for years and that a dinner had finally made the script too obvious to bear. I told her about group chats that never found my number and about holiday tables. where an extra chair did not make it onto the list. I said that I had learned to pack dignity like a travel-sized item, so it fit in any room. I said I did not come here to be right. I came to see what respect would look like if we started using it in full sentences. Connor stared at the rug and said he had grown up inside a contest he never named. He said the numbers he chased at work felt safer than feelings he could not sort. He said that the word loser came out of his mouth before he knew it had teeth, because it let him be the one who threw the first punch. He said that after the banner at the hotel and the week that followed, he could hear how small the word sounded. He said HR had opened a review and that he understood the link between posture and consequence in a way he had not before. Dr. Porter asked if we wanted to build a small bridge instead of a perfect one. She said small bridges carry people just fine. She asked what I needed to make room for a future that did not require rehearsals. I took a breath and kept my voice even. I said I needed consistent respect, not a bright day of praise followed by the old shadows. I said I needed a boundary around my work and my time and my home. I said I needed any public words to match private behavior, not the other way around. Then I laid out the order that would let me forgive without losing myself. First, my parents deserved a private apology from their son for the way his words had turned a family dinner into a stage. No cameras, no crowd, no leverage. After that, a public apology could live in the world. Short, clear. Accepting responsibility without sparkle. No passive voice that hides the hand. No performance. No tagging me to harvest approval. If he could do those two things in that order and keep living like the apology mattered, then we would have a beginning. Connor nodded and kept nodding as if the motion could keep him balanced. He said he was afraid of being invisible next to me, and that fear made him loud. He said he did not want fear to be the boss anymore. The words were not pretty, but they were true, and they sat between us without wobbling. Dr. Porter asked if we could try the sentences out loud without using the shape of a speech. She had Connor practice a private apology to our parents that started with, "I did this and I am sorry," and moved to, "I understand the impact." She had him add that he would be cooperating fully with his review at work and that he would not be asking them to defend him to anyone. Then she asked him to practice the public version with fewer words. I was wrong to speak about my sister the way I did at a family event. Her achievements are hers. My words were disrespectful. "I am sorry. I will do better." Hearing it in his voice made the room feel wider. She turned to me and asked what I would say in the moment when a public apology landed. I said I would keep my response simple and focused on family. I would not turn it into a duet. I would not use his apology as a ladder for myself. Dr. Porter smiled. A small, approving smile, and said that modesty in public is sometimes the most courageous choice. I texted Sophie from the couch and asked her to watch the news cycle for a quiet window that would not look like we were chasing a headline. We agreed on a target after lunch on Friday if the morning went smoothly for my parents, or Saturday morning if we needed space. Sophie said she would draft a time-stamped plan and hold it lightly so we could adjust. She also said she would mute comments that tried to turn our mother into a character or my company into a prop. We set a small list before we stood. Connor would call our parents when he left the office and ask to see them that evening for a conversation without distractions. He would bring no one. He would say the words he had practiced and then stop talking long enough to listen. The public piece would wait until the private piece had happened. I would not be present for the first part. I would trust the adults to be adults. When we walked out into the hallway, the air felt a degree cooler. Connor looked like a man who had been handed a map and told the trail was steep but passable. At the elevator, he said he would call me after he spoke with our parents. I told him to do what he said he would do and that I believed he could. We rode down in silence and stepped into the November night that smelled like dry leaves and distant rain. He went left toward the train, and I went right toward the bus, and the city let us part without comment. Back at my apartment, I poured water and stood at the window long enough to watch a cloud lift off the lake and pull apart. My phone stayed on the counter because I could not carry it for one more minute. I thought about small bridges and plain words, and how a person learns a new language for care. Then I set a timer for tea and let the kettle take its time. Friday morning carried the sound of delivery trucks and a sky the color of paper. I stood at my counter with tea and waited for my phone to decide if it needed me. A short message from my mother arrived first. She said Connor had come by the night before and spoken plainly without excuses. She said he listened when they told him how his words had landed. She said they were tired and relieved. I let the message warm a place that had been cold for years. Sophie checked in with a plan for the day. She had a quiet window in the early afternoon for Connor's public apology after Family First, and before the rush to the weekend. She would watch comments and mute anything that tried to make our mother into a character. She asked if I wanted to respond. I told her I would keep my own words simple and inside the shape of family. The clock moved toward noon. Priya and I sat in the small conference room with our laptops open like cliff notes for courage. At 12:03, an email from Marcus landed with the subject line that tells you the answer before you read the body. He confirmed that Silverline would continue the pilot and that his team was ready to open conversations on a master service agreement for the first quarter of 2025. He thanked us for the clarity on privacy and for a demo that spoke the language of buyers. I closed my eyes for a second and felt the tight thread in my spine unwind. I wrote back that we appreciated the trust and that we were ready to begin immediately. Priya forwarded service terms and a list of next steps labeled in the clean order she loves. Sophie sent a quiet congratulations and then pivoted us back to the next hour. Connor's post went up just after lunch. It was short and plain and sat on the page without dressing. He said he had been wrong to speak about his sister the way he did at a family celebration. He said my achievements were mine and that his words had been disrespectful. He said he was sorry and that he would do better. He thanked me for holding my dignity when it would have been easy not to. Then he stopped. No hashtags, no photo, no reach for applause. The comments started like rain in a light wind. Colleagues wrote that accountability is a sign of strength, not a weakness. Old friends said they were glad to see a family remember what matters. A few strangers tried to stir old ash, and Sophie muted them without a ripple. The balance was clear. People wanted to see a grown-up own a mistake, and then go do the work that proves it. I kept my response as promised. I wrote that families are complicated and that I was grateful for a brother who chose respect. I wrote that we were both learning and that our parents had raised us to try again when we fell short. Then I closed my laptop and let the world talk to itself. Mid-afternoon brought an email from Professor Naomi Feldman. She said she had read the Forbes profile and a few of the following pieces. She said that if Aurora intended to lead in this space, we should consider publishing a clear set of internal principles on data ethics so that marketing never outruns practice. She said she would be willing to advise if we committed to more than the right words. I felt a clean yes rise in me. I asked Priya to draft the first version using the promises we already keep. We built a page that said what we do in the order we do it. Protect privacy. Minimize data. Provide clear controls. Submit to audits. Own our mistakes and fix them. We posted it on our site before dinner and linked it where people would find it without fanfare. That night I walked to my parents' house with a bag of groceries and the kind of tiredness that is good for sleep. My father opened the door and for once did not reach for a story about work before he hugged me. My mother fussed with the oven and asked if I brought the good salt. We moved around each other the way people do when they remember the choreography of a kitchen. No one mentioned social media. No one mentioned lists. The relief in the room was not loud. It was the steady kind that lets a body put down weight. The following week moved with the busy quiet of a city in late November. My team started work with Silverline and the rhythm of deliverables and check-ins answered every part of me that believes ordinary craft is its own medicine. Connor kept his head down and cooperated with the review at work. Now and then Maddie would send a photo of another page of his notes, the kind with dates and names and small boxes ticked off in order. On November 25th, the HR review closed. Connor sent a message that read like a weather report you prepare for. He received a written warning, a reduction of a portion of his fourth quarter bonus, and a 90-day performance improvement plan. He also received a note that he would not be considered for a raise in the next cycle. He said he understood, and that the lesson had arrived with receipts. I told him I believed he could meet the plan with integrity. He said he would. By evening, the noise around us had settled into a hum I could live with. I took a walk along the lake and watched the dark water hold the last of the light. For the first time in a long time, it felt like the story belonged to the people living it and not to a chorus. The city turned on its winter face, and I let the cold clear my head until my cheeks burned and my hands wanted a warm mug. By September, the light in Palo Alto had that dry clarity that makes the mornings feel new. I unlocked the door to our small R&D lab and breathed in the faint scent of whiteboard markers and new servers. We had just closed our Series D at an approximate valuation of $1.8 billion on paper. Our team had grown to about 320 people across 3 countries, with engineers in California and Dublin and Bengaluru trading handoffs like a clean relay. The number looked big on paper and small in my hands, the way numbers do when you know how many nights live inside them. The 3 multi-year contracts that once felt like distant summits had settled into ordinary rhythm. Silverline hit its second milestone with fewer stockouts than last winter, and a schedule that no longer needed luck to stay in line. A national apparel chain had signed and then stayed even after a procurement audit pressed us from every angle. A regional grocer used our signals to move peaches before they bruised, and the buyer sent a quiet thank you that sounded like a person who sleeps better. I learned to trust the soft kind of proof, the kind that lives in calendars and invoices, and the quiet of an inbox without complaints. I practiced saying no to the kind of spotlight that blurs the work. 2 conferences wanted keynotes with my face on a banner, and I passed. A magazine asked for a day in the life, and I said I already had one. Professor Naomi Feldman reviewed our ethics page and sent back notes that made us better without making us defensive. We booked our first independent audit and built the muscle to answer with receipts instead of adjectives. Daniel kept an eye on the edges, and Sophie only pinged me when something needed a light touch. Most days were meetings and code and walks to the corner for coffee, which is to say most days were good. Connor had moved by spring. He left the big firm for a mid-size agency where the job title is less shiny and the decision-making is more real. He runs client strategy for a set of accounts he actually likes. There is less grandstanding in his calendar and more work he can point to without raising his voice. In May, he and Maddie stood in a small garden behind a brick church and promised ordinary things. The guest list was mostly family and a few friends who know how to bring casseroles and not bring a camera. My mother cried in a way that did not require rescue. My father held a linen handkerchief and looked like a man who had found his breath. The estate plan that began in a quiet office last fall is now a stack of signed pages in a fireproof box. The powers of attorney sit where they should sit. The beneficiary designations reflect what we actually do not, what a younger version of us imagined. No one calls in a panic to ask what happens if. We already answered if. Clarity is a kindness I wish we had learned earlier. One Sunday in early summer, Connor asked to cook at our parents' house. He arrived with groceries and a list and no audience. He set a roast to slow cook, handed my mother a bunch of herbs to strip, and stood at the sink with my father to peel potatoes. After dinner, he asked for a few minutes at the table. He did not give a speech. He said he was sorry for the ways he had made our home feel like a contest. He thanked them for hearing from him earlier in the year and said he would spend the rest of his life proving he could be gentle. There were no phones out. There were no applause lines. Just 4 hands reaching for dishes and warm water running in a sink. We kept our Tuesday lunches. Sometimes we met near his new office and shared a bowl of soup in a place with a chalkboard menu. Sometimes he came to the lab and I made coffee that Priya says is too strong. We talk about small things more than big things. He asks about onboarding in Dublin. I ask about a client who wants results faster than reality allows. He has learned to say, I was wrong without flinching. I have learned to let the sentence land without explaining it away. That is its own kind of repair. When the Series D wire came through, I sat with the spreadsheet open and felt the ground under my chair. On paper is still the right phrase for numbers in motion. I closed the laptop and walked to the big window that looks west over the trees. The lab hummed softly. Workstations blinked in their patient tempo. I thought about the night a phone lit a room and how easy it would have been to swing back with something loud. The better revenge turned out to be small and daily. Boundaries. Craft. A family that chooses dignity on days when pride would be easier. If it were you and someone in your own family cut you down at a table, what boundary would you set first? And what kind of justice would help you heal without losing your dignity?